On September 5th, the murder of Agneta Westlund would shake the small Swedish village of Loftahammer. Over the next year, the police investigation would focus exclusively on Agneta's husband Ingemar, to the point where he would leave the town to live with his daughter. While this story has an unexpected twist, it is one that was right in front of the police from the very beginning. At 6:32 PM on September 5th, 2008, in the small village of Loftahammer, Sweden, 68-year-old Ingemar is on his ride-on mower cutting the grass when his 63-year-old wife Agneta decides to take their puppy Yoke out for a walk. After Ingemar finishes cutting the grass, he heads inside and begins preparing dinner so the two can watch the track and field event at 8 PM. With the dinner finished and now cooling in the kitchen, Ingemar now wonders where his wife is and sits down to turn on the television. By the time the 100-meter sprint finishes, it's 8:20 PM and Agneta has now been gone for close to 2 hours. At first, Ingemar calls around, thinking she may have stopped at a neighbour's on her walk, but finds no one has seen her. Now worried, Ingemar gets on his quad bike and rides through the woods surrounding his property. It's around 10 PM when he makes it to the lake that backs onto their property, and it is there he spots Agneta lying on the lake's jetty. Rushing towards his wife, he notices her body is cut and bruised and attempts to comfort her, but when he pulls Agneta's face towards his chest, he realizes she's already gone. Frozen from the shock, Ingemar struggles to process what he's seeing. All he can think to do is race back to his home and call the police. Next, he calls his daughter Teresa to tell her that her mother had passed. After speaking with her father, Teresa immediately gets into a car and makes the hour-and-a-half drive to her parents' house. By the time Teresa arrives, the house is dark, but a group of 18 people, including police, paramedics, dog trackers, and neighbours are on the scene. When Ingemar comes out to greet her, the look on his face makes him appear considerably older. The look, however, is not just from the grief of losing his wife, but the realization he was quickly becoming their prime suspect. The two sit on the couch by the television Ingemar had been watching only a few hours prior, as police move about their house and the dinner Ingemar had prepared goes cold. Teresa watches her father go through cycles of shock and grief. It almost doesn't feel real, until news of her mother's death is announced on the television beside them. Leaving the living room, the two stand on the porch outside. While emergency responders comb the crime scene, Ingemar is not allowed to leave the property, so the two call out for their dog Yoke to come home as searchlights dance in the distance. The next morning, investigators had finished speaking with the medical examiners and Agneta's body had been sent for autopsy. From the findings, investigator Johan Brun concludes that Agneta had not died where they had found her and believed her body had been placed there after the murder had taken place. Emergency personnel on the scene would also report to Johan and note they believed Ingemar had been acting strangely and claim he gave them contradictory statements during their questioning. These reports, coupled with the belief Agneta's body had been moved, the lack of an alibi, and the idea that statistically a partner was more likely than not to be the perpetrator, was enough for Johan to make the decision to detain Ingemar for his wife's murder. With the decision made, Johan would take Teresa outside and ask her if she could wake her father, who was sleeping on the couch inside, so they could take him to the police station for further questioning. Ingemar complied with police, understanding he was considered a suspect, but reasoning the quicker he was cleared, the quicker police could focus on finding what really happened to his wife. But it was when Ingemar was ordered to take off his wedding ring that he began to grow worried of the investigators' true intentions. Just before 11 AM, now at the police station, Ingemar is awoken by police and shuffled into an interrogation room. Ingemar doesn't request a lawyer, still hopeful police suspicions would be cleared and the investigation would move forward. While Ingemar is hopeful, the residents of Loftahammer had already received an official police statement announcing they suspected him of murdering his wife. To make matters worse, local newspapers had already begun printing headlines wrongly stating Agneta had been stabbed to death. What her autopsy report actually presented was something neither police nor the medical examiner had seen before. Agneta had been the victim of incredible violence. Her chest had been crushed and a number of her injuries were similar to other victims who had been struck by a vehicle. But she had also sustained cuts on her body which could only be caused by something that could hack, rotate, and twist. In particular, one of the cuts on Agneta's back baffled police. It was close to 5 inches wide and similar in size to a car wheel. Though they hadn't seen these types of specific injuries before, it did not take long for police to put together what they believed happened. Ingemar had told them he was cutting grass on his ride-on mower prior to Agneta's murder. The autopsy showed signs of being run over, but some of her other injuries could only be caused by something that they believed could only hack, rotate and twist. This idea led police to theorize Ingemar had killed his wife by striking her with his ride-on mower before transporting her body on his quad bike and dumping it on the lake's jetty. As Ingemar walked into the police interrogation without a lawyer and no prior knowledge of what they believed actually happened to his wife, police continued to search his property. During the search, they would test the blades in the surrounding area for blood, and state they found the presence of blood not only on the lawnmower blades, but also the quad bike Ingemar had been riding. With this finding, Ingemar would be officially detained during his interrogation on reasonable grounds, and placed in a cell while police waited for the substance found on the lawnmower blades to be tested. In less than 24 hours, Teresa's mother had been murdered and her father imprisoned, and all she could do was stay in the small village and pray that her father would be cleared and released. When all seemed lost, a small ray of hope would come home. Yoke, the puppy who had been missing since her mother's murder, was found and returned to her by police, and shortly after Yoke's return, the lab results would come back. The tests concluded the blood found on the lawnmower blades was not human. In their report, they stated the blood sample could have been caused by a small animal, or simply the rust on the blades. With the police's theory debunked, 68-year-old Ingemar, after 10 days in jail, would be released onto the street in his green prison pants, his phone out of battery, and a bus timetable to find his way home. After his release, police went radio silent, relaying no information to either Ingemar or Teresa on the murder case. But that didn't mean nothing was being done, it just meant the family wasn't going to be privy to what the police were doing. While the Westlund family anxiously waited for answers, police continued their investigation on Ingemar. During this time, they would collect over 250 pieces of evidence from the crime scene and interview literally half the village. In a village with a population of 400 people, police interviewed over 200 people, and its effect would be devastating for the Westlund family. During Agneta's funeral, Ingemar would be forced to publicly grieve the loss of his wife while surrounded by people who believed he murdered her. Soon the pressure of living in Loftahammer would become too much, and he would make the decision to move in with Teresa in a town over 180 miles away. But it wasn't just Ingemar suffering. For Teresa, this was the first close death she had experienced. If her mother had died of any other cause, there would be an outpour of support, but because of the police's insistence labeling her father as the culprit, the support was non-existent, and above all else, she still had no idea what actually happened to her mother. The Westlund family would endure the silence while the police continued their investigation under the belief Ingemar had run over Agneta with a lawnmower. Attempting to confirm this theory, police would begin carrying out experiments trying to replicate Agneta's injuries on slaughtered pigs by using a ride-on lawnmower. By mid-December, over 2 months after Agneta's murder, Ingemar would finally receive a call from investigators. But instead of information, they would request Ingemar to return to his home in Loftahammer so he could reconstruct the events that had taken place on the night of his wife's murder. During this reconstruction, they continued to focus on the lawnmower theory, asking him questions about where he'd cut the grass and if he used earmuffs. After the reconstruction was over, Ingemar would return to Teresa's home, where they would spend Christmas and New Year's without hearing anything more from police. In late January, Ingemar would finally receive a call about his wife's case, only it wasn't police, but rather a journalist. When he answered, the journalist asked him how he felt about the police press release announcing he was no longer a suspect. While relieved, Ingemar didn't know anything more than he did on the day she was murdered. Investigators didn't even know what murder weapon was used, let alone suspect anyone else. By spring, Ingemar would finally move back to his old home in Loftahammer and decide to do his own digging to see if he could find any more information regarding his wife's murder. Though police had already interviewed half the town, they still refused to contact him with any information. Despite his best efforts, with the stigma now surrounding him, Ingemar came up with nothing and remained an outcast. The friends he did still have would inform him on the rumours and gossips circulating about his return. Some villagers went as far as to spread rumours of witnessing him purchase a new lawnmower and joking he was planning his next murder. As more time passed, the silence, which at this point was expected, continued until the start of winter, when a forensic technician would start running more tests. Of the 250 pieces of evidence collected, a ribbon of fur found on Agneta's body, previously believed to be her dog Yoke's, was finally tested. The results of this test would change the entire investigation. The hair did not belong to either a dog or a human. Finally, the investigation turned away from Ingemar, and evidence was sent away to be retested. One important piece being Agneta's jacket, which had 3 stains on it, and when the results came back, would solve the whole case. The stains on Agneta's jacket were caused by moose saliva, something police had not bothered to look into despite the fact tracking dogs employed on the night of Agneta's murder picked up the scent of a moose and found moose tracks and droppings along the lake where she was found. Authorities then brought in moose experts to examine Agneta's injuries, and it was confirmed the injuries were consistent with the antlers of a male. Moose experts would theorize Agneta must have come across the moose during its mating season, and its likely yoke antagonized the already aggressive animal into attacking her. Not long after, Ingemar would receive a call from the chief of police explaining they had solved his wife's murder, and they believed that a male moose had trampled Agneta. At first, he didn't believe them, and even accused investigators of taking the easy way out after failing to catch anyone after nearly a year. When they told him about the DNA found on Agneta's jacket, Ingemar asked why it hadn't been detected the first time, and was told it wasn't found because police were only looking for his DNA. What's even more astounding is the silence Ingemar endured from the police was intentional and a tactic they employed after tapping his phone. They believed if he stopped hearing from police at some point, he might slip up and admit his guilt over the phone. Once the case was closed, Ingemar would receive a 9-page letter from the interrogating officer explaining all of the mistakes they had made and admitting they had taken the wrong direction right from the start. But despite the police admitting they had made mistakes, the damage was already done. Ingemar was detained on the night of his wife's murder, labelled a murderer, put in jail for over 10 days, surveilled by police for over a year, and had his reputation destroyed. On December 1st, 2009, police would officially announce their investigation was concluded and a moose had murdered Agneta. 2 years after being cleared, Ingemar would sell the house he and his wife shared. The night before leaving, he would do what he had done countless times with Agneta before. It was something he did on a regular basis for all his neighbours across the lake. Ingemar rang his farm bell and played a 45-second rendition on his trombone. The next morning, he left and moved to Nacka, where he focused on taking care of his grandchildren and his dog Yoke.